Welcome, everyone. We're back for our second edition of the week of the PA High School Football Report. Brian Linder, Dan Sostek. Dan, what's going on, my man?
We are the PA High School Football Report, but this week I've been, busy with the other football. A lot of good soccer in the area right now. It's, you know, I don't know if it's because of Christian Pulisic or whatever, but we've got some of the best teams in the country. So I'm going from football to football this all back and forth all week.
There might be some inspiration there. He had a camp in Hershey one time, sponsored by Panini. But there might be some. It would be a good inspiration. I think he's probably worth, I don't know, 40, 50, $60 million by now.
Yeah, he might be internationally. He's probably one of the most famous American athletes in the world. So, uh, but yeah, it's uh, it's it's a football week for me in more ways than one.
Hey, man, let's talk about something I posted today on Penn Live. You know where we're going with this. Look, week one, God bless Ron Corsi. And if he's listening, Ron, we love Chambersburg Peach Ball. And this year we love the York Suburban Rose Bowl showcase that you guys put together. It's a great chance to see a lot of good teams and see some interesting storylines developing. Buddy, was there an interesting storyline there at the beginning of the year, Dan?
Yeah,
Life Christian rolls in from Virginia to play MOTEP and loses 87 nothing. Dan, during the game, I'm joking. We're texting back and forth with our office group. There are people on social media saying it too. You know, Life Christian looked a lot like Bishop Sycamore, BS High. They didn't have anything going, looked a little unorganized. They won one game since then. They're 1-6. And we're not going to put everything. If you guys haven't not familiar with Bishop Sycamore, then I don't know why you're listening to this podcast, because I would think that you would know high school football, and it's been a huge story to sort of transcend the sports. HBO did the BS High documentary. I recommend catching up that. We're not going to put any of the shenanigans that were supposedly surrounding Bishop Sycamore on Life Christian, because we don't know, and they got a first year coach and they're struggling. But Dan, circle of life. I think we're living in I think this is all some sort of like simulation, Dan, because this can't happen in real life. Richmond Times Dispatch says that Life Christian, who everyone joked and said looked like Bishop Sycamore, is going to play Bishop Sycamore, Dan, November the 9th. How's Bishop Sycamore still a thing, Dan? What's going on?
yeah. Well, I mean, I didn't watch the documentary. I didn't. I kind of got.
You got to watch it, Dan.
I got the gist of it. I I imagine that this Bishop Sycamore team. I think it honestly is going to be one of those things where all the notoriety and negative publicity is going to turn that somehow into like a passable football program because there's just going to be so many eyes on it. They're probably going to bring in money everywhere they play now because people are going to, there's going to be the novelty of, hey, that's BS High or whatever. And then BS High is going to start, getting some money funneled in the program. And all of a sudden, there's going to be a 4-star quarterback playing at Bishop Sycamore. I feel, you know how Eric Epler does all the lines every week for us that we do pick'ems. I want him to make a line for this game. I want to assign him the duty of trying to figure out how to properly line this football game. And it's no insult to anyone on Life Christian or anyone in Bishop Sycamore. It's just, there are two teams that I don't think Life Christian is got the national pub, and they could be pretty good, honestly, and just had a bad.
Per that Richmond Times Dispatch story, Dan, there are some questions around that program too.
Yeah,
And you could see, and again, they have a first year coach. They appeared to have some dysfunction against Emotep, which brought about the jokes. And like, you can't even make it up that now Bishop Sycamore is coming. Dan, I'm still not sure. And if you watch the documentary, sort of paints it out like they don't even have a school. So there's so many questions around this. I would assume that maybe they have a school now, and I would say there's probably more scrutiny now, but who knows? The fact that they went unchecked like they went unchecked to begin with. Who knows what level of vetting is going on here. I would pay to see this game if they put it on pay-per-view. I would pay, I would pay 9.99. I would pay 19.99 to watch this one high school football game. If I had hips and I was healthy, I'd drive 4 hours.
You know what this game is? A couple weeks ago, we got Logan Paul versus Dylan Danis in boxing. This is
Yeah,
the Logan. This, I mean, again, I don't want to come off as any of these players. It's not an
oh, it
insult to
is.
any
Thought
individual player. It's
feel
about
bad for the kids, but you're right. Sideshow.
yeah. It's about what it's watching some mismanaged. Again, like I can't express enough. These issues are not about one individual player or even it's about how the things are managed. And football is such a sport that is entirely based on behind the scenes infrastructure, because it's such a team sport. It's such a sport dependent on staffs and positional groups and everything. And so it just feels like definitely Bishop Sycamore. I think everyone knows what the deal is there, but
There are so many questions, so many rabbit holes we could go down around this and how this happened, what's going on. But just forget them all. The only question I really got is who do I give my money to see this thing go down? I told Ed O'Brien, our friend Ed O'Brien, um, the kids that listen, he does all the star rankings for 247 Sports. Make sure you inbox him and ask him why your star rankings aren't very high.
yeah.
That's a joke. That's a joke. He actually doesn't, but you guys can mess with him for me. You can, but I told him he should drive the 4 hours, Dan, just to get the footage.
Yep.
He could
Him and
sell it
Big
back
him
to
and Big
Netflix.
Star. Him
So
and Big
he could
Yeah.
sell it back to Netflix in 2 years or
Yeah.
HBO.
Yeah.
So hey, look, there was a connection to PA football. They play here at the beginning of the year. Emotep smacking them around. Dan, we're in the final regular season week of the season. It's crazy to me. We've talked about this. It really seems like time is flying, and say it all the time. I don't know if it's because of getting a little bit older, or what's going on. The world's spinning faster. Here we are. Um, Wanted to get you on here. I know you and Epler talked about some playoff sort of projections for next week. We always like to look ahead. But as we wrap up this regular season, Dan, I wanted to, talk to you and Ep's actually feeling a little under the weather. We were going to have Eric Epler on here, but as you look at it, Dan, teams are going to be in the playoffs. Maybe teams that aren't going to be in the playoffs. Guys who stepped up. What were the big surprises for you? For the Mid-Penn and anything statewide too that you could think of through this first half of the season.
Well, I wanted to kind of, I thought that it would be a good time to when you kind of shot me what we're gonna do today. I kind of thought it'd be a good idea to, maybe look at some teams that aren't gonna make the playoffs and kind of talk about some storylines from there. I just got a text from one of our freelance photographers, Vicky. I think anyone who goes to high school football games in Central PA over the last decade knows has seen Vicky around. She's just always kind of paying attention. She was shooting me a text, and we were kind of talking about just the funny little stories. When the last time we've had two female kickers in the Mid-Penn, both Middletown and Northern. I think Sarah Yike and Anna Lehman, both kickers, and those two teams are kind of interesting stories as a whole too. It kind of just jotted my brain. First off, I mean, obviously Middletown has not had the best year, but I mean, I feel like that's almost kind of we almost just kind of moved on from that story after week one. That Middletown returned to football this year with a pretty depleted and young roster. I was talking to Scott. I heard Scott Govern kind of over was kind of listening, peeping on a conversation he had at the Hershey soccer game, and he was talking about how they've been kind of encouraged with how this team has performed this year, and that they think their really young team is going to be good in a couple of years. So that's an interesting thing. And then Northern, I mean, the story about Northern that I feel like we can't over talk is just the usage of Cole Bartram, and we've been talking about it all throughout the week. Is this is his last rodeo on the football field? He had one of the greatest games we've seen in recent memory, both in volume and yardage a week ago. How he's going to say goodbye because he's third in the league in tackles and leading the league in rushing. Um, just Yeah, the like, just stories like that I'm always interested in, kinda talking about before we move on and focus on the top teams in the conference.
You guys didn't notice last week, if you didn't notice, Cole Bartram, Northern running back. He's a senior. He's going to wrestle at Lockhaven. Really good wrestler. Last week he went out against Gettysburg. It was a 63-42 win. He ran for 500 yards and 9 touchdowns, which is by everything I could find in the state of Pennsylvania, like a top 4, 5 performance all the way around.
Yeah.
And he had 17 and a half tackles too. And hey, Bill Miller, a lot of people were like, "Man, is he overdoing it with that guy?" And that's just too much for a kid. And I would say if he was doing that for 11 weeks, it would be kind of crazy. I mean, he's had good usage all season, but you talk to Cole and you look at it this way: he's got one football game left in his life, Friday. Unless something crazy happens. I mean, he could certainly play football at Lockhaven. He's good enough to play there. He's not your 4-4 running back or linebacker. He's probably like a 4-8 kid, and he's about 5'10" and probably, I don't know, 185 pounds right now in football season. Um, Maybe a little bit more in football season, but I mean, he could certainly play at that level. But this is probably it for him. But it was an amazing stat line. You mentioned Anna Lehman. I think she's missed just one extra point all season. You saw her in person. She's got a boot, man. She can
Yeah,
kick it a little bit.
yeah,
She's a really good soccer player, and their soccer team's number one. In District
I
Three.
mean, she's also the Mid-Penn, she's a Mid-Penn track champion too. I
Yeah.
mean, she probably outruns some kids on out. They might need to use her as like a slot receiver or
Yeah.
something at some point.
You know, I like that talking about guys and teams that are going out. You look at Big Spring. I don't think they're going to make it.
Yeah, I think they've had a really, really, really encouraging season for like a lot of kids that I think are going to be decent players wherever they end up at the next level. Like, I mean, Grant Hall's one of the most fun players to watch, I think, in the Mid-Penn. He's like a classic high school football player, right? He's not going to be playing at Ohio State or anything like that, but he did not look out of his element playing against teams like Steel High and Trinity and those type of things. And he's a little shifty back. And then I think we've talked about him a decent amount, but Zachary Mell's a good football player. I think I think he's a guy that probably a PSAC level player, right? The 6'5", 220, 230 is always showing up on all of our stat leaderboards. I think we all kind of counted out Big Spring this year, losing Ethan Eisenberg, and I think they've had a much better year than anyone could have anticipated.
East Pennsboro was the team that nobody saw coming. I mean, they're sitting here now. They got one loss going into the final regular season again. Keith Otis, guys, we talked about him some, but just a quintessential like good high school football player. He's not huge. He's like 6 foot, about 210, 200 pounds.
98 tackles on the year
I
playing
need
quarterback.
tackles, probably over 2,000 yards of offense playing quarterback, turns around, plays middle linebacker. That's been fun. I want to say, Camp Hill. Camp Hill did not necessarily, and I don't know what their whole outlook looks like. They on paper they've had some tough losses and probably haven't had the prettiest season, but they're not very deep. You know,
They're beyond not deep. Like they've got barely enough players to. I mean, they're probably smaller than a lot of 1A teams. I
but they
imagine.
do have a good quarterback.
Yeah.
You have a couple guys like Noah Doy and Kobe Moore who are good ball players. So they've kind of like even when they've gotten beat a couple games, they got beat bad. They're kind of a fun team. They're not going to bore you to death, and they
Well,
got a couple guys that can play. So tip of the cap to them through this.
yeah, one of the things about that Camp Hill team that I think can't go overstated enough is just like their core group of guys. They're winners because I mean they're on that baseball team that has made all the way to the state championship game. A lot of those guys are on that baseball team. And Kobe Moore and Noah Doy are really good wrestlers as well. They're just a lot of kids that it might not be a big enough group to actually make noise when it comes to playoff time. They're also a group that I think they're just competitors and they're guys that aren't really gonna look at their sideline and compare roster size to the other sideline and immediately give up. They're guys that probably think they have enough no matter what the cards are, what cards they're dealt. They might get a rematch with Trinity, and that Trinity game, you could argue they should have won. I think we said last week I completely agree with their decision in that game to go for 2 and go for the win. 'Cause I think they probably weren't gonna win that game in overtime. And so, I mean, I think they know what they're doing. They're just one of those feisty teams that are, you can't overlook them or else they're gonna make a game a lot harder than it needs to be.
A team that I don't think has a shot here, and I'm not dug into the points like Ep has and you have, but City East to be wrapping up their season at Carlisle. Just wanted to say again, two of the funner guys that you'll watch play, is Xavier Armstrong, who's not a very big guy, not really a burner, scrappy little feisty dog out there, Dan, who makes catches and makes tackles in the box, and then Jared Porter. I think probably had over 2,000 yards of offense playing running back for them. He's only a junior. You want to go check out his film, guys? It's a fun watch. He's a good football player.
Yeah, and Zachary Brown, he was one of those guys who started getting those offers, and you look on Twitter, you're like, I don't really remember this guy, and then you watch him this year, he was all over the field in the games I covered. I mean, he was blowing up plays against like his game against Harrisburg. He really kept CDs in that game by force. I think he forced multiple turnover on downs in that game. He's gonna be a Division 1 football player, I imagine. Jared Porter's probably gonna be a Division 1 football player as well. Jared Porter, like Cole Bartram too, getting ready to wrestle in the winter. So we're gonna have. I mean, last year we had a state champion wrestler who was also one of the best football players in the Mid-Penn, and Riley Rebell. Uh, I don't know if Jared's gonna make it all the way to states. Cole Bartram probably will. Um, but I mean that CDE's team was really hard to peg down all year though, right? I think you could make an argument that they probably should be in a better spot than they are right now. That Chambersburg loss is really gonna, I think, eat at them because 4-5 versus 3-6. That Cedar Crest loss was a game that you look at the final score and you think it was a blowout, but that game turned on a couple plays and was a snowball running downhill. I still think that CDs should have been a playoff team this year, and I think they're going to look back and kind of have some regrets.
I uh I don't think anybody, we talk in the office as the season progresses about who are, we pick an all PA team, but we also pick a mid-pen all-star team. And so we were actually just talking this week about right now who the defensive players of the year would be, who the offensive player of the year would be, who the coach of the year would be. And to give you guys a little insight, like what we're thinking is no surprise. I mean, when you have those conversations right now, you're talking about a Jeff Wechter who could be on track to repeat as a state championship coach, Andrew Irby who could be on track to repeat, or both of those guys look like they're on track to repeat as state championship coaches. You talk about Bob Bowden, who's had another great season. We talk about him. We talk about um, um, our guy. I'm drawing a blank. How come I'm drawing a blank, Dan? Our guy at East Pennsboro.
John Denniston,
John Denniston. John, I love you. John and I have talked several times across the years. And
he's done a
I
tremendous
don't know
job.
why I was, yeah, done a tremendous job there. Here's one for you. And if I would have told you at the beginning of the year, Todd Milheims wouldn't have played until the ninth week of the season,
Well, I would
and
have, yeah,
Josh Borelli's Lower Dolphin Falcons would be now 6-3. I don't think I would have taken that. I don't
no,
think I would have said that. He's done. Borelli and his guys have done an excellent job at Lower Dolphin this
yeah,
year.
and I was at that Milton Hershey Lower Dolphin shootout. He was not happy. Like they were you know a first half of Lower Dolphin football, which they didn't play in that game, away from really just being in a really good spot right now. Uh, they've just kind of found ways to produce offense. They don't really have much of a passing game, but Carter Burden's been really good on the ground at quarterback, and then Gerald Sanders and Dakota Sari have really stepped up in Milheim's place. They could be an interesting team because I think Brian knows how my opinion on. I think Ty Milheim's a really good running
Really
back.
good. We
Yeah,
ranked him like a top 100 guy. I don't think anybody else considered him a prospect like that. But before this injury, he supposedly had a high ankle sprain.
yeah,
He's like 6 foot 6'1", probably around 200 pounds. He can run.
yeah.
Okay,
He's like a 4.5, 4.5 ish 40, which is really good for that height. Um,
could
I,
probably play linebacker. He could probably play running back for some
Yeah,
teams. He
I
ran.
think he's played a little defensive end too. Like he's a versatile guy. I'm interested to see if they can surprise some people in that first round of the playoffs and get him a couple more because again, we've talked about this a bunch, but that stuff stinks, right? When you're going into your senior year, big year for your recruiting, and week before the season, turn your ankle, and then you don't have any film to send out from your senior year.
And so you guys know where Dan really kinda I always pick at him and say he's in the, the Milham's militia or Milham's mafia or whatever. Where he really jumped on the bandwagon was Bishop McDevitt last year, a 4A championship team who has now you see Rico Scott, who's going to Alabama, and Chase Regan, who I don't know about those Duke 40 times still. His dad and he say they're legit. But I can tell you that kid can run and he's a
Yeah,
freaking good football player. He's going to James Madison. They got Nevin Hopkins, Jerry Rawlinson, all these big names. They had Tyshawn Russell. And you went and watched that game last year, and Ty Milhouse had some explosives against those guys. He ran and outran some of those guys. Uh,
yeah.
so, I mean, there's got to be, if you're a college coach looking for a guy that might be a real big time sleeper right now, Ty Milhouse is probably worth a look.
Yeah, I know he has a lot of interest from Ivy League schools, which that'd be a pretty. I think that'd be a pretty good level for him. I think because I think he is right around that sort of caliber player where he can play in that one double A, maybe like a school like Villanova or something like that. Those type of teams. I mean, if he ended up at Shippensburg, I think he'd end up a really good player there too. The Shippensburg team. I mean, we talked about it earlier in the year, but that Shippensburg University team is loaded with District 3, former District 3 stars.
Russell Stoner's son now, Sam Stoner, is kind of taking over there, and they got the quarterback from Warwick, Joey. I don't know why I can't remember Joe. I can't remember anybody's names. I had a really good relationship with Joey, but the quarterback from Warwick is out there too. But Sam Stoner, who
Yeah,
went to West Virginia to walk on, and went there through spring practice, bounced back to Shippensburg. He's been playing really well for them. They have a lot of local guys on that team, like
yeah,
you said.
and we're seeing more than ever now that PSAC schools you can get to the NFL. Look
Like
at our boy Tyson Bagent. I mean, he
I
had most of his films against like Westchester and Shippensburg, and he's a Martinsburg, West Virginia kid.
I think at one point Shepard had like 3 or 4 kids on the NFL roster.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, like, and isn't that like that's kind of the big thing that we're finding about like there are always going to be these kids that we think are better than where they end up sometimes. But a lot of times these kids can find a way, like they just find a way, and I think there are a lot of kids like that in the Mid-Penn now. But um, yeah, I think it is funny looking at that Shippensburg roster, and it's a lot of who's who of years past in football.
Anybody else that you want to mention real quick before we move on to the next little thing I wanted to bring up, Dan?
Well, I mean, we were doing our defensive stats I was doing my defensive stats last night, and it's always fun. Like send a group chat. Hey, do you know who leads the Mid-Penn in XX? Do you know? And then I sent one last night. Can anyone guess who leads the Mid-Penn Conference in sacks? And a lot of the guesses would be like Eugene Green, Ryan Epps, those type of kids. The Mid-Penn Conference league leader in sacks right now is Parker Funk on Greencastle Antrim. He's got 13 sacks on the year, ahead of guys. Line mountain Maxime Johnson is right up there too. Two guys that I think not a lot of people would guess. Parker Funk and Greencastle's probably going to make the playoffs. They've had a good year under Devin McCauley, and
Johnson's an interesting cat too because he's like 6'4" and like 190, so he's like really
yeah,
tall and lean.
you
He's quick.
wonder you wonder if that's true, but, like, sometimes the max preps, height and weight aren't accurate, but you watch the film and I think he is just the tall, skinny guy that, gets around the tackles.
You put a little bit of weight on him, though, I think he might could play somewhere because he's quick.
Yeah.
So yeah. The stats are interesting. I would have never. I didn't know it was Parker Funk. Looking through him going into the last week, Carson Schwartz, another guy I mentioned a lot of times on here, had a really good season out at Carlisle. They didn't have a lot on offense, and he's not the biggest dude, but he's got some quicks. And he heads into this last week with 52 catches for 1,089 yards. Josh Smith out at Mechanicsburg,
Yeah,
66 catches, 922 yards, 14 touchdowns. He's a really good football player.
you can't get me to well, first off,
Good
like,
athlete.
yeah,
Hooper.
I loved watching Josh Smith play basketball last year. He was, like, that Mechanicsburg team had no I mean, they had no business going as far as they did. I thought Mike Gaffey was right up there for coach of the year. I think I believe,
Oh, Dan, hey guys, in the meeting, Dan got on the soapbox for you. He was pounding the table.
it was a stacked year last year. I think we had, we obviously had David, Vespignani and, uh, obviously, why am I blanking on,
State
Bri
college.
yeah, Brian's name. But,
I
yeah, I
thought
mean,
the coach at Redland did an amazing. I kind of got on the soapbox for the coach at Redland because they've been
but
so
this
bad through the years.
yeah, but
They
this
made the playoffs.
Yeah, but it goes back to what I said with those Camp Hill kids. There are certain kids that are just competitors, right? That are obviously you have to have a base level of athleticism. But Josh Smith on the basketball field last year, on the basketball court last year, uh, I mean, they beat a Pittsburgh team um, that had a kid that's committed to, I believe, I think Marquette, Royce Parham. They beat them, and I just think that uh, kids like that aren't afraid of anyone, that aren't going to take no for an answer, they're always going to find ways to contribute. That Mechanicsburg team, I kind of thought was going to be one of the not worse. That's a little harsh, but kind of one of the kind of lower level teams.
Worse, not they were they were
Yeah,
and they look rough at times, but Anthony Rhodes is a good dude. Uh,
I think they've done a good job.
he
I
look
think with what they've had this year, I think they've really outperformed what I thought. Is there a feisty team that can win some games? I mean, they beat Susquehanna Township, right? Like, it's a which is a really good win. Yeah, I think they've done a really good job with that roster. And
that's a good transition to why I was going to kind of wrap up this part of it. And I was going to touch on a few things as we get ready to ride off into the sunset with this podcast. But you mentioned Susquehanna Township, and I've been here now, I think 7 or 8 years now. I've been here and I've covered high school football since I was 17 years old. I've been doing this 23 years now. This has been one of the more. I have 5 games going on a Friday night here. In what I call my all the streaming options we have now. I watch a ton of football, and Dan will tell you guys, I probably once or twice through the week, I end up sending them a film or talking about some kids' film I'm watching on Huddle too, because I get interested when I see a kid put up numbers. I go see what they're doing. I'm actually going to go watch this Cole Bartram 500-yard film because he tweeted it out, Dan. So, but this has been like the craziest year as far as like I just have not been able to get a handle sometimes on teams and how things are going to play out. Susquehanna Township being one of them.
yep,
You look at them, they got TD Evans who can, he can make some throws here and there, and he's still got some upside. He's still got some work to do, but he
he's a
can
young.
make some
Keep
throws. And then,
forgetting he's one of those kids you forget as a sophomore because he's played a lot of football
yeah,
already.
and then you got Lex Cyrus out there, who's probably the fastest man. He won the 100 meters in the state. He's a big time college prospect. And Dorian Smith, Garrett Kern, you got these weapons, and then they lose to East Pennsboro and they lose to Mechanicsburg. I don't know how to happen. And they're not picking on them because I'm kind of getting into. It's like it's been a wild and crazy year coming in. Mid-Penn Commonwealth, Dan. I thought it was going to be like this, just
Oh, we
crazy. We went from thinking it was Harrisburg to thinking it was Central Dauphin.
State
Th-
college.
Then State College comes out here and just kicks the crap out of Central
Now
Dauphin.
Cumberland Valley is looking like one of the better teams in
And
the
now Josh Oswalt, you know, I like Josh. They were pretty darn bad through the first half of the season, but somewhere in there, I think he just figured out to hand the ball to Bryce Sterritz, and that's working out swimmingly for them.
yeah,
And they beat State College,
yeah.
and so and
I
oh by
was
the way, Harrisburg shut out State College 20-0, and I think that Harrisburg for me has come back around to where I still don't think they can make up that difference in Manheim Township. But it's been the Cal Everett thing that they've been able to do the last 5 or 6 years. I
well,
think they've
I
gotten
was yeah.
better in some of the areas they were bad in. But it's been a crazy year. I haven't been able to figure out a lot of teams. Dan, how do you feel about it? Have you experienced it?
I was at Central Dauphin on Tuesday night in the press box, and whenever you're at Landis Field, they're always going to be talking football. There's a girls soccer game on, number one team in the country, by the way, Central Dauphin Rams. They were up 11-0 in the first half. That was an experience watching that game. But in the press box at halftime, we were talking about. They asked if I was going to be there for the Central Dauphin Harrisburg game, and I was like, "Yeah." They said we cannot figure out this Central Dauphin football team. I was like, "You and me both, brother." Like, It's just a they could easily come out and be I think they could easily come out and win this game. Like I not easily in that they should easily win. I'm saying it's easily in the realm of possibilities that Central often wins that game
They could
28-24 or
they
something.
could beat them. They could beat them, or they could lose 39 to 14.
Exactly. Like, because I think they have the talent up front to hang with Harrisburg, which is how Harrisburg wins a lot of these games, right? They just kind of bully you up front. They and then they use Sean Lee's legs to just dice up defenses. I think Central Dauphin has the capabilities to deal with that, but in talking to them, they said one thing that they've really struggled with this year is they've struggled, defending the pass, which is not a good thing when you're going up against Elias Koch. I don't care what Elias Koch's one of those guys that I think he's living proof of do not look at season long receiving yardage stats to tell you how well someone's played because he's had a really good year. They really haven't needed to throw the ball that much, but anytime they've needed 25 yards, they just kind of throw the ball up to Elias Koch and he mosses dudes. But I cannot figure out Central Dauphin. I think that they're a team you probably don't want to. I don't think any team you really want to play in that 6A. It's the 6A bracket is going to be a mess outside of Mannheim. I think.
Harrisburg has really been the most consistent. Okay,
Yeah,
they got
the CD's team is
absolutely destroyed by Manheim Township, and the CD East game wasn't pretty. But outside of that, they got one loss. They've been the most consistent, but they have you and Eric Epler did like the Flaws podcast. They're not a perfect team, and they got some young guys, so they're still kind of like if anybody from the Mid-Penn is going to make a run at it in 6A this year, they would kind of be my pick.
yeah.
But again, Central Dauphin could end up there, and who knows Cumberland Valley the way they're playing now. Now, I still think I just cannot get the scars of what Matt Zollers did to them, you know, on film and what a couple other quarterbacks did to them out of my mind. I don't you can hide that some, I guess, running the football and controlling the clock, but not all
Josh
of it.
Oswald's teams a lot of time. Like I mean, he kind of knows how to get the team playing better as the year goes. I mean, I think and especially for that CV team, I think all underestimated somehow because I think we all knew this. I think we all underestimated how much Isaac Signs did for that team at quarterback, and I think it's taken them 7-8 weeks to figure out what they need out
Well,
of the quarterbacks.
what about our boy JD safety?
Yeah, yeah, and JD Hunter too. I mean, they lost some talent last year, and I think we kind of underestimated because they had a lot of young talent, how easy it would be to move on from those guys. Isaac Signs has been a good wide receiver for Millersville this year too. I mean, they've but that defense, I think Alex Save has started playing some better football in the second half of the year. They've got Tyler Merrill's starting to eat up some kids. I think you always forget their best offensive tackle is a sophomore, and that's always going to be you know
Outside of Steel High Bishop McDevitt, who've been consistent and looked like favorites, I think, to win state titles. It's been the craziest year where I feel like every week we're like, oh,
still
this
even
week
have any peg on Trinity either. I don't. I mean, we haven't seen
no, because look,
Pickett.
they probably Yo's down a little bit, but they probably should have beat Yo. Messiah Mickens, I think, showed that he can be maybe the best running back in the state, which surprises nobody. But I don't think he's been 100%. Probably like the third or fourth week of the season. I don't know where he's at now with it. That's important. I mean, if they get him and Christian Joy's running well, and I think Caleb Ray's playing a little bit better at quarterback, then maybe they can make a run, right?
Yeah. Well, and also I think one of the biggest things that I'm looking at in this last week is we talk about another team we talk about a lot. We haven't mentioned this podcast is West Perry, and just how big it would be. I don't think they're going to beat Steel High, but imagine how big it would be for that team to get the 1 seed, in the District 3 playoffs and make Y Missing come up to Elliotsburg as opposed to having to make that trip down to, Reading and play Y Missing. I mean, play at Y Missing because I don't know. Like, I don't think Westbury's big enough. I keep saying this, but they just keep winning football games, and I don't know.
Well,
It would be a pretty cool. It would be a pretty big moment for them. I think to host that game against Y Missing.
Yeah, you know, I don't think West Perry's had an incredibly strong schedule.
No.
This Steel High game is going to tell a lot. Steel High's very good. Last year, Steel High hung 54 on them.
Yep.
West Perry scrapped out 34 at their own, but it was not really a pretty game overall.
No.
Um, I don't I don't think you need that. You need to if you lose this game, if you're West Perry, you probably need it to be a little bit more competitive um, to go in and really make a splash. If there's ever going to be a year that they're going to get by Wyo, it's probably this year. They're not what they were. They're still pretty darn good though, and they're going to run and play their brand of football, and they're not going to make a ton of mistakes. So you got to be on point, and you don't want to get knocked on your butt going into the playoffs, which is possible.
Yeah.
So that's one of the more interesting games this year. Really to close it out. Um, that we'll be watching. But Dan, look, I wanted to talk a little bit about state football. We only got a few minutes left here. There's not really, I don't think, a ton to say, honestly. Just looking at Eric Epler's rankings this week. If you guys haven't seen them, go to PennLive. As we get ready to close out the regular season, 6A still got St. Joe's Prep on top, 7-1. A surprise to me, Parkland at 2 at 9-0. Manheim Township's there at 4. I still think, I don't vote in this poll. Other writers do. Um, I still think Manheim Township should be higher. Pittsburgh Central Catholic had the one loss. They're down at 6. To me, I like Central York, but I think Pittsburgh Central Catholic might smack them around. Uh, and Central York's at 6. Harrisburg's at 10 there. Imhotep 1 in 5A, no surprises. Roman Catholic plays St. Joe's Prep this week. They're 3 in 5A. I'm super excited to kind of see what happens.
There are some big games this week. We also got Aliquippa Central Valley is going to be a fun game too. I mean, I think Aliquippa has they're 8-0, they're undefeated. They haven't looked quite as unbeatable as I mean, they were beat
Here's
last year.
here's one Evan Wheaton was talking about. We should have brought him on here. Our new guy Evan Wheaton. He just came up. Pope John Paul II sitting there at third and 4A. They're 9-0.
Yeah.
And we could end up with a Bishop McDevitt, Pope John Paul II playoff game, and they're a pretty good team.
Yep.
I don't know. That's a give me from McDevitt.
Yeah, I mean, it's just every year it's like this, right? We just don't know where McDevitt stands at this point in the year. I think this year we're more confident probably than in years past, right? Because of what they did in those first 3 games, right? That they just looked they kind of faced off against some really, really good football teams and handled them. And but again, it's been 7 weeks. Like we haven't we don't the McDevitt is just always gonna be you're just gonna have to see it on that Friday night in late November.
I'm
Like you
just
just
going to the polls real quick. 1A, Dan, number 4 and 1A is Fort Cherry. Matt Sega's their quarterback.
oh,
The
he's a class.
sophomore. Last year, I think it was last year, they were getting kind of beat up pretty good.
Yeah.
But I would look and, I'd read the Pittsburgh papers and stuff, and he would have like incredible stat lines. Like he would have like 200 yards rushing, 250 yards passing, or 250 yards rushing, 200 yards passing. He'd have like punt, like kickoff. He'd have like an interception.
Yeah,
Um,
he's got offers from Penn State and Pitt. I think he's listed on 24/7 as a safety. So I
he's a
know
proven baller.
yeah, I know a lot of people up there kind of still think he could end up playing quarterback, but I mean, I think at safety kind of makes a lot of sense too. And even talking Whippeal stuff, I mean, Pine Richland even has looked pretty good of late too.
They were just they I think they're just snapping the ball to
They're
Ethan
Billy.
Pillar,
Yeah.
however you say it, and just letting him run is kind of like a ancient offense. I think they've been running, but it's working, and they won the state championship last year. And that 1A is going to be fun. Northern Bedford's at 3. They got a running back named Adam Johnson who does all kind of crazy numbers. Lackawanna Trails at 2. Bishop Canavan is at 5. Red Bank Valley, their quarterback. Braylon Wagner every week is in our, we run down, we do a list of about 200 players, guys from around the state. We're the only ones that really kind of do that every top performance we can find. And Braylon Wagner every week, Dan's like 250 to 350 yards passing. That's going to be fun. Steel High, I wouldn't say Steel High's pretty darn good. Okay. And they got the all time leading passer in the state and leading touchdown thrower in the state and Alex Irby and some weapons around him. But there's some good teams down there that might contest them a little bit. So
Yeah,
I'm
and
excited. Yeah,
that state championship game win last year, it's not like they blew out it's not like it was a blowout win either,
Un-
so
Union made
there's
them
still
scrap.
yeah, there's still a lot and a lot of those guys that contributed in that game aren't there anymore. Not I still think if you go Steel High or the field, I'd probably still take Steel High, but just because of the upper level talent that team has, but I don't I don't think any of these brackets are gonna be I'd say if you had to pick one team besides St. Joe's Prep that you were most confident of any classification to win, I think you'd probably say Ematep, right? Like that would I think that'd be a
Hey,
clear.
I talked to Devin Johnson beginning of the year. That's their coach, guys. You know, one, he knows that people have enjoyed seeing them get there and not win it.
Yeah,
Okay. Um, and they're a charter school and people have certain feelings about that and how players end up there and whatnot. Uh, I do think that they do good things for their kids. I've been up to Imhotep several times. And I can tell you, they know they got some haters. They're also hungry as all get out, man. They are tired of getting there and coming up short with the guys they got. So I don't think there's a team more motivated to win it this year. And they got the guys. So I think Tyseer Denmark, the Penn State receiver, is going to be able to play in the playoffs. Last time I talked to the coaches, they sounded like they were, amicable. Rick Preet used to actually be an assistant at MOTEP. I think they were going to sign off on everything. So, if he's on there, they got their guys. We don't get a lot of stats out of Philly area, but man, they're loaded. So, look, I think we got a podcast. We've talked a lot of football. Just season's wrapping up. You're going out to the field tomorrow for an exciting one. This weekend, we're coming back. We got Tyson Fury fighting Francis Ngannou. Uh,
I'm rooting for Francis. I don't think it's gonna be pretty for him, but I don't. I imagine that the guy who doesn't know how to box is not gonna be the greatest heavyweight of all time.
one of Francis's first MMA fights in UFC, one of his first fights at the Amway Center in Orlando, and I was cage side for it. And he came in and pretty sure he knocked the guy out. But I was pretty impressed. And I walked back, and I was actually standing in the hallway. This was before he was Francis Ngannou. He was standing next to me, and I was kind of sizing him up, Dan. And, you know,
You think you can take him?
I'm, you know, you know.
We'll
And then,
organize
then-
that.
and then
That's
I
just
went to Four Rivers Barbecue and I ate, and I looked over, sitting next to me was Robbie Lawler, and I was
I
like,
think Robbie Lawler versus Francis Ngannou would be quite the scrap. I think Robbie could take him back in the heyday.
I was like, "Hey, Robbie Lawler," nodded, and then I went back to my brisket.
There you go.
Four Rivers Barbecue, Dan, in
That's a good
Orlando,
way to end
Florida. You have to go if you ever get down there, guys. Go to Four Rivers. Free advertisement for them, Dan. They have a milkshake station, okay, where they'll take like snickerdoodle. They have like a bakery, right, and they'll turn it whatever in their bakery into a milkshake if you want it done.
That's
So, like,
pretty
if they
sick.
have like these giant snickerdoodle cookies and you want one, they'll just make it a milkshake for you. They'll stick it in a blender and it's like heaven. And they have burn ends. And it's just like, you know,
Stop it!
when
You're
I
making
win
me hungry.
Powerball,
You're making me hungry. Please
I'm
stop.
buying a Four Rivers when I win Powerball. We're way off track. UPMC, thank you guys for being a great sponsor. Megan's popping up, our producer. She's trying to tell me it's time to go. She's going to hand out Halloween candy tonight. Um, I'm going to go watch old scary movies. I like a dork. Dan, we got a podcast, PennLive.com. Everybody, check us out. Check out Dan Sostek on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it. Check me out at Sports by B Linder. Check out all our guys. Check out all our content at PennLive.com. We'll see you guys next week.